introduction. I actually made my one and only purchase from the really cool gift store, if you haven't seen it yet, and their little dog earrings. So I am a crazy dog mom, there's all there is to it. Maybe even a helicopter dog mom. So yes, I have plenty of pictures to show all of you, but I'm thrilled to be here. I think I'm going to hold this, just because it's easier for me. Okay, good. So, hello Colorado. I can't believe it's taking me so long to get to your convention. I guess all you had to do is have one of the dude branches. So we'll leave it at that. But this is a beautiful place and a great crowd, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit here in the beginning about Title IX and kind of some happenings that are going on with this amazing, quite frankly, revolutionary civil rights law that AAUW has worked on for so long. And then I'm also going to try and give you a little bit of a feel for what's going on in Washington, D.C., and also want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for questions, so we can play Stump the Policy Director. Does that sound good? Okay, all right. So Title IX. I consider AAUW kind of the protector and defender of Title IX. Title IX is that wonderful federal law passed back in 1972. So it turns 45 next year if you're looking for some program ideas. That prohibits sex discrimination in any federally funded educational program. So if federal money touches it in any way, Title IX applies. That has made it hugely impactful in terms of women's equality, but it's expanding in kinds of ways that are helpful that I'm going to talk about as well. The thing I think I always like to try to remind people about Title IX is that, of course, it's so much more than sports, right? That's the first place we heard about it. It's the first place, and I think it's sometimes the most controversial thing. Ironically, it was the football coaches who wanted to make Title IX application to sports proportional. So in other words, as many students as you had, you'd split men and women, and you'd have the same percentage of sports opportunities based on the population of that particular school, because they just never thought that women would become the majority in colleges and universities. Now they're a little stuck with that, right? But there are so many other places where Title IX has a role, right? So let me ask you, Title IX obviously applies to sports, we know that. Where else does Title IX apply? What other kinds of issues within education does Title IX come into play?
Recruitment.
Recruitment, that's right. Recruitment, retention, employment issues. A lot of people forget that it applies to employment issues for people who work in K-12 schools or colleges and universities. Recruitment of students, recruitment of employees, right? So that's a huge area. Where else does it apply?
Scholarships.
Scholarships, absolutely. So, and this is interesting, not athletic scholarships, but academic scholarships. And that's also missions, right? Remember, it was Title IX that opened up the military academies. It was Title IX that, in many respects, opened up the professional schools, whether it was medical school or law school. You know, one of the kind of godmothers of Title IX, Patsy Mink, a longtime representative, unfortunately died several years back, from Hawaii, AAUW member. Part of why she got so interested in this issue is because she wanted to be a doctor. And she kept applying to medical schools, and she kept being told that their quota for women was already filled. And usually the quota at that point, as many of you know, if it was a medical school of 200 students, they might allow 5 women. Right? So she got so angry about that, she decided she was going to go to law school. Now, Patsy was a native Hawaiian of Japanese descent, and Patsy is kind of her nickname. She has a rather unusual ethnic first name that you can't really tell. It's kind of gender neutral. So when she applied for law school, she used that name. And when she got to the University of Chicago, they were expecting a young man, but they had admitted her. There was not a whole lot they could do with that. She told me once that if she had been married at that point, that would have been the reason they would have used to bump her up. But she hadn't gotten married yet. So she always felt like Title IX was her baby, because she experienced it firsthand just in terms of access to the professions. But then we know within the educational systems, even once you're admitted, there are other issues that Title IX applies to in terms of making climates better for women. So what other places do you think Title IX has an impact?
Did it affect the dorms and opening up the housing?
it had access to housing. It doesn't necessarily mandate co-ed dorms, much to many co-eds dismay. Yeah. Also absolutely applies to pregnant and parenting students, right? Just because you may get pregnant or may be a parent doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to your education. You got to remember, part of what we're talking about here with Title IX is there a particular gender discrimination? It's gender neutral, so it can apply to men and women. Is there some kind of gender discrimination going on that's getting in the way of you fully accessing that educational opportunity? This is why it applies, for instance, to sexual harassment, to campus sexual assault. That by definition obviously has a gender-based component. It is a gender discrimination, and obviously we know it can have a huge impact on people's ability, especially young women's ability, to access their educations, right? Many of you know Title IX, as it applies to campus sexual assault, has become a huge issue. Don't many of you feel like finally this issue's time has come? It's not like this hasn't been happening, unfortunately, since the dawn of time. But we have had this amazing kind of perfect storm of activity, both from young women on college campuses who are survivors and courageously sharing their stories and demanding change, from advocacy groups like AAUW that have risen up to support them and have been doing this kind of work for a long time, to, quite frankly, an administration in the Department of Education that was ready to take this issue on, right? A lot of our friends at colleges and universities feel like they think they've got a little caught flat-footed, maybe, that they weren't expecting kind of strong enforcement in terms of how Title IX applies to campus sexual assault. Of course, the reality is Title IX has been around since 1972. Nothing that the Department of Ed is doing right now is new in terms of how they're interpreting things. What's new is that we have voices speaking up, and we have a Department of Education Office of Civil Rights that is holding schools accountable. Right now in the United States, we have almost 200 colleges and universities that are under investigation for violations potentially against Title IX directly related to campus sexual assault. So it's an epidemic, right? If you look at the stats, they say anywhere from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 young women of college age will experience sexual assault while on campus. And unfortunately, while there were some colleges that were doing a great job in handling it exactly as they should be, there are other colleges that weren't. The weird thing is that there is some confusion about how Title IX applies. Because I think a lot of us, when we hear sexual assault, think immediately police, filing a charge, maybe somebody goes to prison, right? There's a criminal justice element to it. But the other thing you've got to remember is that while that always is an option if a woman decides to report, we always got to leave that up to her. But there's also the civil rights element of it, which is Title IX. And what Title IX says is that if something like that happens on a college campus, the school needs to investigate, not just in terms of what they might do for that particular student. I mean, think about it. Think of all the things that a school is uniquely positioned to provide that, say, law enforcement isn't. A change in schedules, maybe a change in dorms, right? Things that can be a safety issue for her. But the other thing that they're supposed to do is to look at it from a more kind of holistic standpoint, to think, all right, this happened here on our college campus. What can we do not only for this individual survivor, but to prevent it from happening again? What do we need to work on in our campus climate to make the campus more safe for everybody? So when we talk about campus sexual assault, two things must or potentially have to happen. One is the civil rights element that the school is responsible for looking at, and the other one is potentially the criminal justice element that we see on TV all the time that has to be potentially followed again if a woman decides to file a charge. So that has been a fascinating part of what AAUW has been involved in. Obviously because of our concern particularly about the campuses or climate on college campuses, but also because of our legislative work. So many of you may remember back in 2013, we passed the Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Within that, we had an AAUW written piece of legislation called the Campus Save Act that improved kinds of ways for schools to deal with campus sexual assault. It doesn't change Title IX, but it puts some things in there in terms of data collection, put some requirements in there in terms of prevention programs, right? And not just at freshman orientation, right? This happens all the time. So we need to make sure that we have prevention programs and support programs for anybody who might be in that particular situation. So Title IX obviously covers campus sexual assault. But remember, it also covers sexual harassment. So it's really the whole gamut of violence against women. When we talk about it, we often talk about it in a way that says, look, if we could spend more time and energy dealing with sexual harassment, a lot of the more violent aspects of discrimination against women could be dealt with. It's a continuum, and if you can nip it in the bud, you can have a real important impact. So that's something that AAUW has been working on legislatively quite a lot. Other places that it can be involved in, the STEM fields. Believe it or not, Title IX is now the rising tool that we're using to get more women and girls into science, technology, engineering, and math. Remember when I said in the beginning that Title IX applies to any federally funded education program? Think about how much money the federal government gives out in grants to universities every year. Whether it's NIH grants, whether it's Cancer Institute grants, whether it's grants from the Department of Energy. Actually, one of the things that's supposed to be happening is that every time those different departmental entities, not just the Department of Education, but any of them, that give money to a school, they're supposed to make sure that school is in compliance with Title IX. You know who has one of the best compliance programs for Title IX right now? NASA. They have a Title IX administrator. When they give those grants out to schools, they are going and doing site visits to make sure that people are not being discriminated against based on gender, and that the programs themselves are as inclusive and as hospitable as they can make them. Because we know there's a chilly climate for women in STEM, right? So this is also one of the tools that we can use. So when you talk about Title IX, whatever kind of part of education that you have a kind of personal interest in, whether it's access to sports, because we know girls who play sports are much less likely to get pregnant, they're healthier, they get better grades, they're much less likely to use drugs, they're much less likely to smoke, much more likely to go on to college, right? So it's not just about, does she have access to that team? It's about, does she have access to the benefits from being on that team? Whether it's STEM, whether it's making campuses safer, whatever it might be, there's something in Title IX for you. And that's something that I want to make sure everyone hears loud and clear today. So why am I talking about Title IX? Well, we have a unique opportunity in front of us. And something that I want to say has really paid off in terms of your advocacy for AAUW. Throughout the Obama administration, we've been working really hard to develop a relationship and work with the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education. This is the office that's responsible for essentially enforcing Title IX. And not just Title IX, also ADA kinds of regulations, race discrimination claims, all the things about access to education and civil rights. One of the things that you might be surprised to know is that every school is supposed to have a Title IX coordinator. Someone who literally is the person who is responsible for understanding how the law applies, for kind of taking on a regular basis the temperature of that climate, seeing if there are any particular patterns or issues, and then addressing them. This is the person who also receives complaints and does investigations to see if there's an issue. Every college and university is supposed to have one of those Title IX coordinators. On the K-12 level, there's some confusion. I know you're stunned, right? So on the K-12 level, there's really actually a lot of confusion and disagreement about whether the law requires every school to have a Title IX coordinator or every district to have a Title IX coordinator. While that is still up in the air, the reality is the best practice is that every school has one. And the reason for that is that you need someone who is taking that temperature of the climate, who is there to receive complaints. You know, a school is supposed to make notice about the fact that Title IX exists and how to file a complaint a couple of times every year. It's supposed to be on their website. They're supposed to have an anti-discrimination policy. It's supposed to be in the student handbook, be on the website. It's something that they talk about with parents. Does any of this sound surprising to you all? 45 years after Title IX, we still have schools that don't have their Title IX coordinators. And the Title IX coordinators are the ones that are on the ground really knowing what's going on. So it's critical that not only schools appoint these coordinators, but that the coordinators themselves have the information they need to do the work. Right? It's one thing to say, oh, gee, you're the Title IX coordinator, and you know, now what? Now what do I do? is where you all come in, and this is where something, again, potentially revolutionary, it might seem small, but it's potentially revolutionary, has recently happened. Believe it or not, even though we've had Title IX for almost 45 years, we've never really had official resources from the Department of Education that told the Title IX coordinator what they were supposed to do. We've just never had it. And so AAUW has actually been lobbying the Department of Education for this for the last 5 years. Now, it's no small thing, because in order, as you can imagine, to get together official guidance from the federal government, can you imagine the steps this has to go through? So I actually think it's pretty quick that 5 years later, we finally have it. For the first time ever, Title IX coordinators now have a resource that not only tells them what they're supposed to do, but tells their bosses what they're supposed to be doing. This is important because one of the other protections under Title IX is that if you file a complaint as a student or an employee, or if as a Title IX coordinator you happen to do a good job, you cannot be retaliated against. These are important protections for these folks to know about, right? Now here's the rub. Believe it or not, maybe you'll believe it, the Department of Education is only now in the process of collecting the names of everybody who's a Title IX coordinator. They've not had this before. This is another thing that we've been pushing them to do, and they agreed to do it. This is good. This is good in terms of the fact that at least we're now starting. Every year schools have to file something called the Civil Rights Data Collection, and now on that particular form they have to say who their Title IX or who their equity or who their civil rights coordinator is. Because remember, a Title IX coordinator could also be doing, as I said earlier, race and gender and civil rights, all kinds of equity implementation kinds of projects. So here's what we're doing. AAUW came up with a great project. And it's playing out kind of exactly as we thought it would. These are great materials, but the Department of Education, as I said earlier, doesn't necessarily have the exact list of who to send them all out to. Strangely enough. Now, they blasted it to everybody they could. They sent it to advocacy groups like us. But the reality is, even though this came out about 9 months ago, most Title IX coordinators have no idea that this exists. They have no idea that there's this help available, both technical assistance, best practices, literally a handbook on how to do their job. So what AAUW put together was this whole Title IX pledge and delivery project. And those of you who were at National Convention last year may have heard of it. And there are folks in Colorado, a few folks who've done it here. Essentially, the whole gist of it is for you to deliver these materials to your local Title IX coordinator. Pretty easy. Call the school, ask who the Title IX coordinator is, either make an appointment or get an email or send it however you want to make the contact. But here's the rub. People are calling schools and saying, who's your Title IX coordinator? And people are saying, what's that? This is why in some respects it's revolutionary. Because it's forcing schools to ask those questions. I was talking to someone here about a delivery they made in Colorado where there was Title IX information on a bulletin board. That's great. It had been up there so long, the name of the Title IX coordinator had been wrong for several years. Right? So in some respects, not only can AAUW play a huge role and be community advocates for good education, as we've always been, by delivering these materials, but in so doing, we remind them of who they are, what they're supposed to be doing. I'll tell you a great story. I was making a speech to a consortium of colleges in upstate New York, and we were talking about Title IX coordinators and the work how this relates to campus sexual assault. And this woman came running up to me after the program, and she was so excited. She was like, this was great, so amazing, such amazing information, now we know what we need to do. I called my president, my college president, to ask him who our Title IX coordinator was, because I wanted to make sure she got your card and information and knew exactly what to do. So I called him and I said, President so-and-so, who's the Title IX coordinator? I've got this great information. And the president said, well, you've been for the last 3 years. So there are a lot of folks who've been named Title IX coordinator who don't even know it. Obviously, if they don't know it, how much could they be doing? Now that school has a whiz-bang Title IX coordinator, right? She was me first alarmed, but then very excited about what happened. But we're finding that in the deliveries that are being made, where schools either don't have a Title IX coordinator named, or the person who is the coordinator doesn't know it. And what's great about this is that we're not delivering this, and this project isn't about gotcha, right? It's about, as a concerned community member, we want to make sure you have these materials, and we're here to help, right? Because here's some things that have happened from Title IX, some of these Title IX coordinator deliveries. We've had Title IX coordinators join branches. We've had them come and talk to branches to talk about the things that they're doing. We've had them, actually, branches have a panel, and they ended up being like the connecting group for professional development for Title IX coordinators who didn't know each other. And now they have somebody else to talk about. So if your branch is looking for a fairly easy, highly impactful community project, this is a great idea, right? You can find the information up on our website. It's the Title IX Delivery Project, and there's literally all the tools you need, step by step, the letters you can send, the materials that you can download if you want to give them a paper copy, or a link that you can use if you want to send it in an email, right? This is a great way to make an impact in your community. And when you're doing it, why not write a letter to the editor saying, here's what we're doing? If you go to a school and you get a great reception, write a positive letter. It was so wonderful to go to Hinckley Elementary School and meet with the Title IX coordinator who'd already had these materials. And AAUW feels so great about the work that she's doing at that school. So there are ways that you can, this is the way to write an op-ed. We don't necessarily want you to name names about what schools are having trouble, because we're trying to lift them up. But an op-ed that said, in our county school district, 4 of 12 schools didn't know what a Title IX coordinator was. So AAUW is really happy to be doing this project for the community, and here's what you should know about your rights, right? So this is the web page. If you go up to the top in the search box and you just put in Title IX delivery, all this information will come up. Oregon has delivered to 88% of the schools in the state. Hawaii tried to make deliveries and got a cease and desist letter from the State Department of Education, which we very happily forwarded to the Office of Civil Rights and Department of Education at the national level. Either way, important information to have. The Department of Education is completely thrilled with this project, as you can imagine, because they did a lot of work to pour these materials together, but they're only going to have an impact if we put them in the right hands. This could be a great way to be of service to CU partners that you have. It could be a great way to introduce yourself to other colleges and universities that you've been trying to get to join, to say this is the kind of information and access you get when you're members of AAUW. So you can use it as entree, right? If you have a student group at a particular college, let them make the delivery or work with them together to do it. There are several people within administration that needs it. So it's both K through 12 and colleges and universities. Make sense? Now, as I said, all the tools are on here. If you scroll a little bit, when you get down, you'll see we have an interactive map, and this is kind of fun too, because what we have on there is a map with little flags all over it, where people have pledged to make deliveries. And then we turn those flags a different color when those deliveries are made. So we're being able to track it and talk about the impact. Right? So let me answer there. If you were looking at some of the materials up front by the registration table, you'll see there were samples of some of these materials. So please take a look at that. And I have like 5 or 6 copies of some stuff here. So if you know your branch is going to get on top of this and make this project in the coming year, stop by after my presentation and I'll give you one of those too. But let me stop there and see what questions I can answer in terms of Title IX. Yeah?
You talked about not knowing, not being clear whether it was for a school or for a district. Has that sort of been clarified?
It's still not clarified. And so what we're really urging AAUW branches to do is to deliver it school by school. Even though they might not have a Title IX coordinator, they have a principal. And typically, if there's only one Title IX coordinator for a K through 12 student or school district, oftentimes there's still some designee in each school. So giving it to the principal is a great place to start. Yeah. Yeah.
Are all these delivery materials paper? Is there any audios or videos or anything like that?
Excellent question. So are the delivery materials paper, or is there video or audio? It's all paper. It's the federal government. It's all paper. Right? But here's what's interesting about it, and this is why you should not feel like you need to be an expert on these materials. There are a couple of things in the packet. There's a letter specifically to, essentially, the principal or president of the university. And it basically outlines what they should be doing, what they should have been doing all along in terms of Title IX. Then there's also a letter specifically to the Title IX coordinator that thanks them for their work, that talks about the non-retaliation protections, in addition to introducing the resources packet. And then beyond that, there's a resource guide. And that guide is just a treasure trove of best practices, current thought, the current interpretation of the law, what they need to be doing. And it's essentially their job description, what they need to be doing. And for a lot of Title IX coordinators, this is gold. Part of the reason for that is because, gosh, now over 10 years ago, more like 15, during the Bush administration, prior to the Bush administration, we had what we call Title IX Equity Resource Centers. And they were federally funded kind of centers, 4 or 5 of them around the country, that Title IX coordinators could go to for training, for technical assistance, for best practices, for professional development, networking, all of that. Unfortunately, our friends in the Bush administration cut them. And they didn't do a whole lot with Title IX and the Office of Civil Rights during those years. So the office kind of lay fallow. Then the Obama administration came back in. There wasn't funding to reinstate those equity centers, but they tried through the Office of Civil Rights to provide more technical assistance, and really, quite frankly, have been overwhelmed. The number of staff in that office now compared to 15 years ago is almost 2/3 less. But the number of cases has gone up, right? So this is a great help, not only for schools, because quite frankly, we don't want really complaint files. We want them to do the right thing to begin with, right? So this is a great tool for them to get on board, get on the bus, do what they should have been doing, and make sure that they're in compliance. And, oh, by the way, feel some comfort about the fact that they are doing what they're supposed to do. Lots of the Title IX coordinators are very conscientious, but they don't have access to great resources that tell them how to do it, that reassure them, in fact, that what they are doing is the right thing to do. Because a lot of that was cut, right? And other places where you can get it is very expensive. So their schools didn't necessarily budget for it. So this wonderful free resource guide, directly from the horse's mouths, the folks who are enforcing it and providing the technical assistance, is really a huge impact. And here's the thing. Here's why I think it's revolutionary. You deliver this today, you could literally be helping a young girl the next day. Because who knows when that next complaint's going to come in, when that next incident's going to happen, and they'll know how to handle it. The other thing it's important for you to know is that Title IX's always been interpreted this way, but it's come up a lot more now because of current events. As I said earlier, Title IX is gender neutral. It applies to both boys and girls, and it applies basically about gender discrimination. So Title IX is also being used when we talk about harassment or bullying to kids who are non-gender conforming, to kids who don't, fulfill the stereotype of female or male in a typical kind of binary system, right? So that's been important in terms of bullying and harassment in schools on that level. That has always been what Title IX applied to, but as you can imagine, with current events, things going on in North Carolina, so on and so forth, it's getting a lot more attention. So again, you could literally be changing a child's life the next day because that Title IX coordinator now has that information. There's not, and all the work that we do at AAUW, a lot of it, as we know, is long-term. And we're in it for the long haul. We've been around for over 130 years. We're nothing if not both patient and persistent, right? We have changed the landscape for women and girls, and we'll continue to do so. But it's rare when you come up with a project where you literally feel like, today, when I deliver this, I'm literally going to have an impact. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? Particularly if you have a branch that hasn't really necessarily been a whole lot into public policy, this is a great way for them to stick their toe in the water. And again, as I said, feel that kind of immediate impact, build relationships in the community. And who knows, you may have a list of Title IX coordinators that you want to invite to the next state convention, or that you want to have speak at your branch, or that suddenly become members of your branch and people that can help you move your work forward. So, other questions about, yes?
I just wondered how Title IX did fit with the North Carolina discrimination law.
Yeah, so the North Carolina discrimination law is about public spaces and schools.
I know it's cool.
And it's going to be challenged. So what's interesting right now, of course, is that Title IX, the law itself was passed. And then, this is like any other law, Congress passes the law, but it's up to the executive branch to come up with the rules and regulations for interpreting and enforcing it. So the gender neutral stuff, particularly about gender non-conforming stuff, is an interpretation. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that gets litigated. I think for the North Carolina issue, and of course it's also happening, I think, in Mississippi. Yeah. There are distinct state rights in terms of public spaces, parks, so on and so forth. But there's also questions, for instance, about federal parks. And there's questions, obviously, about schools, because Title IX applies. Now, some schools can get exceptions or exemptions from Title IX. Religious schools, for instance, can get that. Catholic schools don't follow Title IX. But public schools are supposed to. So that's where it's going to be challenged, is they're going to say this is a violation of Title IX, federal civil rights law. What we have to find first, of course, anytime you want to challenge things legally, is you have to have standing, which means you have to have someone who can be the plaintiff, who can show real harm because of the law. So they're figuring that out right now. I expect it to be challenged. And what we've seen so far, because even though North Carolina has a law, obviously it's not the only state where we have different municipalities and school districts fussing around. Any of you who worked on the ERA back in the 70s, does it feel weird we're back to bathroom politics again? But anyway, we just had a decision come down from the Fourth Circuit, which is by no means a liberal circuit by any stretch, that basically said OCR's interpretation of Title IX as applying to transgender students is correct. So the good news is what we've seen so far would undo what's going on, at least in the schools in North Carolina. But it still has to make its way through the process. You should know that AAUW North Carolina is very heavily involved in the coalition, trying to overturn that and work well on that. And AAUW at the national level has signed on to letters and part of that effort too. So, all right. Anything else in terms of Title IX? Are you feeling like you can do this? You can do this. This is a really cool project. And it's a great way to reintroduce yourselves to the schools. And then, who knows? You could create other kinds of projects that you want to do with those schools, right? We've got, for instance, a lot going on this year. It's an election year, right? Really? Can you imagine? It's an election year like no other. But it is an election year. Another great project to do in schools is to go to high school senior civics classes, government classes, and register the folks who are going to be 18 in time to vote. So making a good relationship with your K-12 schools and also your colleges and universities is a great way, not just with this Title IX project, but for other things you might want to do down the line. Yeah?
You said Oregon, they delivered packets to 88% of the schools.
Yeah.
Were some of those schools in rural areas? I just didn't know about the propriety of an AAUW chapter delivering information to school districts that are outside their area, because there's only X number of chapters, mostly in more urban areas.
Right, right. So that's a good question. Can you only make deliveries to schools in your kind of branch's jurisdiction? And the answer to that, I would say, would be it's up to you. I feel like obviously there are national members of AAUW across Colorado, maybe in some of these areas. Definitely set yourself the goal. Go back to your branch. Have a conversation. Maybe you actually divvy up the schools and people take certain responsibility to deliver things. See how much you can cover. And then maybe what you do is have, at a state level, deal with some of the places that are more out of the way or harder for a branch to reach. Because you can always still call that school, ask for the name of the Title IX coordinator, and email them something. I mean, all these resources are available electronically. So there's an opportunity to do that, and it's still a good way to introduce AAUW, at least at the state level, to an educator. There's a hand over here. Yeah.
When and if you deliver this material, how do you know if anything's happening?
Just go back to the check.
Well, that's a good question. Part of it obviously is going to depend on how you know if anything's happening. Part of it will depend on your initial kind of conversation. You'll be able to tell if you're talking to someone who is kind of a seasoned Title IX coordinator and someone who is just, oh crap, I didn't even know I was supposed to be doing this. And so that can really inform how you follow up. And I would follow up. If it's someone who seemed really new to follow up to say, you know, if you have any questions, can I hook you up with our national staff? I hope that you found the information helpful. Someone that was more seasoned might be someone, as I said, you follow up and invite them to come speak to your branch. Given that we have the 45th anniversary of Title IX coming up, it's a good opportunity to celebrate this law that AAUW had such a huge part in crafting and passing. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, part of what we ask you to do is do a little report back form for us that tells you about your interaction and who you spoke with. And so if we see, or if you kind of do a red flag for us, that could be someone even that we might follow up with. So there's all kinds of ways, but it's going to depend on kind of how the initial interaction goes. Makes sense? Yeah.
I'm thinking of overall coordination. Let's say we call this district and somebody else calls that district. How do we keep from overlapping contacts?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think you want to make a plan within your branch, and then you should probably reach out to other branches that are close by and see if you need to divvy some things up. Personally, I don't think it would be a bad thing for a school to hear from 2 or 3 branches, right? Because part of this is obviously assistance, right? Part of this is we want to be helpful, we believe in your school, we believe in the job that you're doing, and we want you to be able to do it in the best of your ability. But this is also accountability. So if they hear from 3 or 4 different branches, hey, we've got great Title IX materials that we hope you're using, that really sends the message, in fact, that the community is paying attention to Title IX. Right? So it's not like I want you to, kind of redo your efforts over and over again. At the same time, a little duplication helps schools understand that people are paying attention and that they'd like to see the schools make Title IX more of a priority than they have been. Make sense? Yeah.
I did call the Loveland schools, and I went through about 4 secretaries before they could figure out what I wanted. And I got to one, and they did not give me the district person, but they told me who was in the high school in my area. I then called him up, and he said I could deliver the materials, and so I did. And then I called back and asked if I could come and talk to him about them. And he told me that he thinks that every athletic director in the high schools in Colorado are Title IX people. I'm not sure if that's true, but he knows lots of other athletic directors who are.
It wouldn't surprise me because there are a lot of folks, number one, that's an easy choice to make, and number two, for people who don't understand that Title IX isn't just about sports, that seems to be a sensible choice to make. So we have schools literally that have been sued because of sexual harassment, who had a very active Title IX coordinator, but literally the Title IX coordinator had no idea Title IX went beyond sports. So this is what's probably
I asked
interesting.
him about the training.
Yeah.
He said, I think the only training is probably if you take a workshop when you go to the athletic convention.
Yeah, you go to the Athletic Association convention, Directors Convention, and there's one about Title IX compliance and athletics. But it does nothing for all these other
So he
issues.
was happy to get the material.
I bet.
I now have the name of the person at the district level. He didn't know about elementary school, so there's more follow-up there.
So it was a positive interaction. And that's also actually a really useful thing. Maybe there is, in fact I'm sure there is, a Colorado High School Athletic Directors Association. And maybe AAUW Colorado calls them and says, for your next convention, could you put these materials, maybe we volunteer to pay for the cost of printing them, could you put these materials in every director's bag? Right? So just thinking creatively based on the information that you've got, there's different ways that you can get the information out there. But I would not be surprised if you run into a lot of athletic directors that are the designated Title IX coordinator and have no idea they're supposed to be doing anything beyond athletics. Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you see this fitting with elementary schools?
Well, elementary schools that have to have Title IX coordinators as well. And unfortunately, the same stuff that we're talking about in terms of sexual harassment, access to STEM classes, making sure that it is a safe and harassment-free zone, unfortunately applies to elementary schools as much as it does to middle and high schools. So they need to know. They may be paying less attention to it, again, particularly if most elementary schools don't have sports teams, and most people think Title IX is just about sports, so they might not have been paying a whole lot of attention. But I guarantee, as we know from AAUW's own research, that we've got bullying and harassment, right? And that much of it is gender-based, whether it's gender-based in a traditional sexism way or gender-based in terms of a non-conforming to traditional gender stereotypes way. So getting it to the K through 5s or K through 6s is just as important. Yeah.
Lisa, I'd like to point out that about 20 years ago, AAUW Colorado, in partnership with Girl Scouts, did the same thing. And there were, I don't know, Sue Gosses, you were president then, I think? Yeah. And so all of...
It couldn't have been quite the same thing because these materials are brand new.
Well, no.
We've never had
What we did was, and it sounds like it's very similar today,
Yeah.
and I'm talking about maybe 2 decades ago,
Yeah.
that we tried to contact the Title IX coordinators in all of the school districts.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I did the Littleton School District, which is in the metro Denver area.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the superintendent at that time who was the Title IX coordinator for the district.
Yep.
So the things that you're talking about now have not changed. And also, AAUW Colorado does have a history
Yeah.
of doing this kind of work within our schools.
Well, that's really good to know, and this is a great way to renew it. You also mentioned, we just talked about the athletic directors, but you also mentioned another coalition partner. So maybe AAUW isn't in some areas, but maybe Girl Scouts are. And you want to do some kind of a partnership with Girl Scouts to do it. Maybe the state education union, I don't know if you're NEA or AFT here, but NEA, so Colorado Education Association. I know at the national level, AFT is interested in having their folks do this as well. So thinking about how this could be a coalition project to really cover more states, cover more counties and so forth. It could be a way for you to kind of renew connections with some coalition partners if you haven't talked to them for a while. Yeah.
Since you're mentioning coalition partners, I would suggest that we try to cooperate with gay student alliances and with PFLAG, because they're already working on that same thing.
That's
on
right.
Gender issues.
That's right. The Gay Student Alliance or PFLAG, all of those are going to be, and they're just learning about how Title IX can help in their particular situation. So that's a great ally as well. Yeah. So yes.
I just wanted to let you know from an LGBTQ community, there's One Colorado is a national, it's a Colorado specific, but it's a national organization that you can reach out to directly on that.
So lots of good opportunities here. And I love, I can feel you guys getting energized about this. So this could be a great project. The other thing I would say to you is that even if your branch isn't interested in taking it on, because every branch has different programming and priorities, this is something you can do as an individual. As an AAUW member, if you just know 2 or 3 schools that you want to stop by, make sure you do your pledge online so we can keep track, turn in your report that it's done so we can change the color of your flag and your neighbors will know that it's been delivered. So it can be a great branch project, but if it's something that you really want to do and your branch decides to be focusing on something else, you can still have an opportunity here to make a difference. So, make sense? Okay. I think I'm going to stop talking specifically about Title IX